and welcome to Forbes India Pathbreakers. My guests on the show are Mamedi and Nami Zarringhalam, the co-founders of Truecaller. Today we'll talk to them about their journey, their challenges and the opportunities ahead. Stay tuned to this conversation. I am Neha Bothra. Alan and Nami, thank you so much for joining us on Pathbreakers.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
You started Truecaller in 2009. This was also against the backdrop of the global financial crisis. How really did you stumble upon the idea and actually have the courage to see it through?
We had known each other since 2003. And 2006, when we finished university, we started our first company together. And then the second. And the third one was Truecaller. But all three of them, what they had in common was that they solved our problems. And they were different in like scalability. So Truecaller was obviously very scalable in the sense. So, just building it for ourselves is where we started.
When did it become a business idea then?
First week after launching it, we had over 10,000 users. So we thought, seems like a lot of other people have the same problem and need that we have, so maybe we should just go all in on this. But I don't think we ever had this plan that we're going to be a large company with hundreds of employees. We just did the things we were passionate about, which was building products, and then we realized, we need another developer. Okay, let's get one in, and then another one, and then all of a sudden you're 450 people. Almost 15 years later. We didn't foresee it being this big, but we definitely knew from the first week that this was solving a problem.
Did you reach out to investors when you realized it's a scalable idea?
When it really started in 2009, we didn't know any investors. We had never tried to raise money, etc. So we were not known in any sense. But what we did was we reached out to a couple of people that we thought could potentially be investors. And then they knew someone who knew someone, and then suddenly you have a seed investment. So that's how it started. But then when it came to raising Series A and like that type of capital from VCs, that was a new game altogether in the sense that we didn't really know what we were getting into. I think the hardest part about that was probably the amount of rejections you get. Like, when are you guys going to grow in this market or that market? And so that was a continuous kind of repeat until we met the right partners for us, which included Sequoia India and now Peak 15 and others.
The proof of concept was there. How did you convince them that there was money to be made?
Many years ago, the app environment was very different. So you could only charge per download. And so we said, we're going to have X millions of users and we're going to make X millions of dollars. But then, things changed. And then we kind of debated on whether we would take the plunge and make the app completely free and go for more users and instead of getting the revenues immediately. And so that's the decision we took. And, we've never looked back ever since.
I'm sure as 20-something-year-olds, you would have been very excited with the first check you got, but were there hidden lessons that you learned over a period of time?
Well, I think we learned a lot, and every time we raised money, we learned new things. But to summarize it, the number one most important thing, have the right shareholder agreement in place. Every time we sort of compromise, because the investors want terms that benefits them and usually not the founders. So we had to learn that the hard way. The other thing is, and this is where I think we were lucky, that is picking the right investors. People that you actually can go out and have a beer with, or because if you're going to have investors that you don't really like them, you're never going to get along, it's not going to be good. We saw other companies, fall into that trap.
2013 is when you took the bold decision to invest in India. Why? You hadn't been to India. What made you take the leap?
I think it felt very natural to us to invest more in India. We were not seeking out to grow a specific market. Like, India found us. I think we also grew up in a household where you're appreciating the things that are given to you, like the luck that you have. whether it's hard work, like hard earned luck or something else. India was definitely underserved at the point. Like none of the large, global companies or even most VCs cared about India at that point of time. The opportunity in India was massive because we also came from, the world where you went from having your desktop computer to your laptop and then come a smartphone, and then seeing India take that leap and kind of leaning into it, trying to innovate for the people of India. We just wanted to invest more and more because it was clearly part of the future.
I think 2015 was a tough year. You had to let go of about 25% of your staff. What did that period teach you? And what would you say were some things you could have avoided?
It was a very tough period for us, but I think it emboldened Alan and me. 6 months prior to that, we had our conviction about what we needed to do to not get into that situation. And we tried to convey that conviction to our then board. And we were unsuccessful, unfortunately, to do that. So the subsequent months, we had to let go of people. You put so much faith in that your investors, they know so much and we can learn from them. But then I think at that point, we got the conviction that actually our sense of the environment matters a lot more. And it's on us to make sure that this is conveyed properly to our investors. From that point on, Alan and I decided we would trust our, gut feeling. And luckily, since then it's been 8-9 years and we haven't gotten into that situation again.
So given what happened in 2015, was there a focus to become profitable sooner? The need to define a clear path to profitability because you weren't making money up till that point.
Yeah. We promised ourselves that we would never put ourselves in this position. And what do you need to do? You need to start generating money. And every Monday we had all hands with the whole organization, and we would have one slide which would be like a bar, a 0 to 100. And the headline was road to break even. The first Monday, of course, it was 0%. And then next Monday, 0.01. And, people were like, okay, this is going to take some time. And it took us a few years to reach break even. And then after 2019, everything just felt so much better. It was like 1,000 tons just fell off our shoulders, basically. What many companies have seen now lately with layoffs and capital not flowing into the companies, we've seen that movie before, and we went through that hard time. So we are extremely grateful that we saw it early on, experienced it, and learned from our mistakes, basically. So while other companies unfortunately have been laying off employees, we've been hiring. We've been doing annual salary increases, improving parental leave policies, and these kind of things. The truth is, it takes time. It took us 3 years to reach break even. It forced us to think that in the end, we're always on our own, because investors are always investors. This Truecaller, for us, it's been our baby. But for an external, it's just money that they put in. And that's just the hard truth.
For many startups during that time, a transaction with Google or Facebook was the ideal outcome. Was that ever part of your goal to consider merging with any of the big tech giants?
We didn't have an exit strategy because we were trying to build product to solve a problem that we saw as globally growing. When we took in VCs, we thought of it as we'll figure out monetization later. But once you're on that monetization journey, and once you get to taste independence, you don't want to trade that with something else. And so it kind of became obvious to us once we reached profitability that the next step in our journey is to do an IPO. Since our IPO, me and Alan have only been buying shares. We haven't sold anything.
So you spoke about monetization, and this was largely on the back of 3 streams: advertising, premium subscribers, and Truecaller for Business. Tell me a bit about how these have grown over the years.
The youngest one is actually Truecaller for Business. So we rolled it out in early 2021. But subscription is something that has been with the product back and forth more or less since the beginning. But to us, it's been quite natural that advertisement is a very common way of monetizing. I think the challenge has been, how do we put in ads that is not intrusive and can also provide some sort of value to you as a consumer, which has a downside as well, because a lot of users actually don't notice that we have advertisement in the app. So they start to question, how do you monetize? And we realized that certain things that we built to the product had a lot of value to a very small user base, like 5%. And we saw that instead of us killing that feature, let's try to put it under a premium product instead, so that users who actually want to keep them, they can pay for it.
Out of the 400 million active subscribers that you have today, how many are premium subscribers? How many pay for the service?
Oh, it's still a fairly low number compared to our ambitions. We want to make sure we build a service that excites enough people and brings value to enough people that they are willing to pay for it. That's the journey we're on, and it's been a couple of years. It is lower than 1%, but it averages out to around 1%.
Globally, it's around 0.5% that is paying subscribers.
So bulk of your revenue is coming from advertising. Tell me a bit about Truecaller for Business. How many subscribers pay for the service, and what is the USP?
The last public number that we announced was over 2,500 large enterprises. This was announced in, let me see here, it was in July. What we've tried to build makes the experience between the businesses and the consumers much better. So for example, you as a Truecaller user, you will know that this call that I'm receiving from HDFC Bank is actually HDFC Bank, not someone who's trying to impersonate them. That's number one. But then on top of that, we built a lot of other features so that you as a consumer can actually give feedback. So it makes the whole experience much better between the consumer and the business.
How's the experience of this rollout been in India in terms of acceptability and the willingness to pay?
Extremely high, I would say. Most of our customers are still with us because they find a lot of value that we bring. Usually we build products for our users and businesses in India, and if they are successful, we roll them out outside of India. So they're built here by our team in Bangalore. And then they scale it outside of it.
Globally, of course, pesky calls is one big irritant. 50 billion calls is what you say you blocked last year?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like the tip of the iceberg. If you want to measure this in how effective it is, I think, looking at how many minutes we save for people having to answer this call just to find out that it's a spam, looking at it from the volume of phone calls blocked, is one way to look at it. But I think an even more impressive part is looking at how many minutes you've likely saved by using Truecaller. The scams and spams have only increased. If you do not use Truecaller, you're actually exposed in a way that, for a lot of people is unimaginable.
So which country tops the list?
On average, I believe the top 3 countries are India, Nigeria, and Mexico.
Do you think going forward, India is going to better the 15-20% growth outlook?
I do believe that our business globally will continue to grow. If you look at our user base, it's actually growing faster outside of India than it is in India. And that is because we see an extremely strong growth in Latin America, parts of Southeast Asia. At the same time, India is a fantastic growing economy. In a couple of years, it's probably going to be the largest economy in the world. Of course, India will always be a very important part of our business. But, we do see Truecaller as, a global company, and we want to continue to invest in growing in some of those regions.
The telecom regulator in India wants to roll out something very similar to what Truecaller is doing. You see room for collaboration, or is it going to be more competition? Because there are also many startups that are also doing something very similar. There's NAM and a couple of others. How do you see the competitive intensity changing in India in the coming years?
We have had over the years many competitors, and we still have many competitors. I think what has been different about Truecaller is like we don't need to measure ourselves compared to anything else. We try to do the best that we can do with what we know we're able to do. I think that comes through in the product, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve your problem in communications and then get out of the way. And I think that is where we kind of created that category and inspired many others, which we're very happy about. Of course, when it comes to regulatory, I think it's a different matter. Probably over 10 years ago, there has been ambitions to curb, spam calls. And I think, different initiatives have had different amounts of success. But what is really urgent right now is the fraud sector. And I think that's where we have, since the past 3 to 5 years, invested tremendously. We've even acquired companies to make sure that we do the best that we can to serve our user base and protect them from fraudsters. We're collaborating with TRAI or the other regulators in other spaces, including in financial sector. We're trying to work with everyone to make sure that we do our part to curb the problem of fraudsters.
Companies want to use AI to curb the misuse of AI. How is Truecaller leveraging artificial intelligence on its platforms?
Yeah, there's a lot happening in that space, obviously. It's developing really fast. The way we've tried to apply it is, one is in the way we work. There are different ways to use it. We're trying to use technology to actually train models to detect these kind of things.
From what I understand, this is quite a cash-guzzling space, building your models. How has the experience been for you, and what kind of investments are you centering around this as a percentage of sales?
We're not an AI type of company. We're just looking at the technology, trying to leverage it in the problems we're already solving today. And that's what we're doing. Then, of course, in the future, we've built products that actually can detect whether a voice is cloned or not. But we're just trying to think in those terms. How do we make the products that we have even better by leveraging new technology?
I do understand that inspired by ChatGPT, TrueGPT is something you are secretly working on. Tell me something more about that.
There's been a lot of new technologies that has evolved and had an impact on our business. Working with these large language models and trying to deploy them to our consumers and create value for the consumer is really what we're looking at. And then you need to do that in a both cost-efficient manner and also in a way that creates value for the end user. But as we roll these things out, we're going to learn in the process, and we'll be diligent about making sure that it's done in a safe manner and that there's things like biases and other things are taken care of. We're not in a rush, and we're also fully open to partnering in these situations, because what really matters to us is solving the customer's needs and where we know that we have a solution, and that's when we will deploy it.
What's the initial feedback you got from customers about TrueGPT when you did your test pilot?
I think we started to test it out in another large market.
Which is Nigeria?
Which is Nigeria, correct. And I think with the strength that we have, being able to deploy new technology to a lot of users, just making it easier, accessible, has been an interesting thing for us to sort of evaluate.
The engagement level of our users was really high on the TrueGPT. We also found out that there were specific use cases where it was more useful to the customers. And I can't go into that right now, but there was specific use cases that was very interesting and where it made more sense. For instance, to just hint at it, a lot of people have very common questions about health. And this is where, you want to be able to actually meaningfully help someone when they have health concerns, but you also don't want to lead them in the wrong direction. And so we take our responsibility, and we want to make sure that we deploy something at scale that actually solves the issues for the consumer in a meaningful way. So I think that's how we're looking at it, and we'll continue to innovate in this area.
How about wearables? What is the scope to integrate Truecaller with a wearable?
We actually quite recently launched Truecaller on Android watches, which has just 2 weeks back. And it's kind of amazing. I was looking at the number yesterday. So our Android watch app is actually top 5 ranked in over 135 markets. So it's been a huge success for us. And it's been really fun. We're seeing a very, very high adoption.
You did experiment in the payment space some years back. What would some exciting adjacencies be for you to consider, or would you now choose to focus on one or two things, having learned lessons in the past?
Our conviction around the payment space was that before any transaction, there's always communication. Whether you're speaking to the store clerk or you're, sending money to your kids or buying something online, you've communicated. There's been an interaction, and in that interaction, how can you make sure that it's safe? At the time, this is many years ago, but cash on delivery was still the most used method for paying when you're buying things online. So that was kind of the genesis of it. And while we ended up shutting down the Truecaller Pay initiative, I think that ambition still resides within the company, that we know that we have solutions for a lot of these things, whether it's to solve for fraud or whether it's to create more efficiency. And I think our capability in that domain is still wide open. So, in the coming year or years, there's going to be more and more things that we do to integrate into those areas and still provide value without necessarily being the delivery mechanism of utilizing, for instance, UPI for that. I mean, UPI is a phenomenal story in itself. The financial sector has its own regulations and constraints, and I think that parties like Truecaller, who actually have a lot of value to create in terms of efficiency, and think that we have a role to play that is much bigger than we're currently playing, and hopefully some of these things will start to show going forward.
You have a lot of data of your users.
No, well, I don't think we have actually. If you compare Truecaller to most other companies, I would challenge any company. We're actually the most friendly consumer product there is. And the reason for that is because why does Truecaller exist? It exists because it wants to protect consumers. And that means that all the practices that we do internally has to apply as well with the same sort of principle. And we have data minimization policies that we actually delete data after a certain period of time. And we've always said that everything we do, we should be able to stand in front of a camera and openly talk about it without feeling awkward. And if it feels awkward, then we're doing the wrong things. So I would say that Truecaller is always on the consumer side, and we always collect. If we collect information, then we always ask the user first, and we only collect the information that we know will bring value back to you as a consumer. So that's been our stance basically since we started the company, and I think for most people who join Truecaller, they actually get surprised how much we care about these things. So I would actually challenge that.
There is a general perception that there is some sort of erosion of trust, in the sense that when customers have Truecaller on their phone book is shared with Truecaller, and the data of the people who've not necessarily downloaded the Truecaller app is also compromised. To what extent is that true?
So that is actually not true at all. When we started the company, we actually built crowdsourcing functionality. So this is in 2009, 2010, where Truecaller would ask you when you install the app, hey, would you like to share your phone book in order to make the service better? In 2013, we actually stopped that way of collecting information. So we haven't done it for 11 years. Now it's hard to change, a misconception. It always is. And then, of course, when I would say that, you would say, but how come my information is there? So our users in India, they make and receive over 4 billion calls every single day. So every time you receive a call, Truecaller actually asks you, who was this? Is this correct? And you can actually correct the information. And then our machine learning models actually becomes better at predicting what the community has said. We have 4 billion opportunities every single day where we ask the community to improve the data. It could be just a single thumbs up button, or even when you press block, that is also a signal to us. Then we know, okay, this is an unwanted call, for example. And that's how we've been operating for over 11 years. So there is a certain misconception. But there's also, it's quite well known that most large and successful tech companies collect a lot of information. Yeah. So people just assume that just because Truecaller is a very successful and large company, we also do that. But we don't. We all know what companies like Google and Facebook and what they do. And we've always had the stance that we want to be an independent company that do things our way, which is protecting our consumers.
So when I was researching for this interview, I spoke with data privacy experts to understand a bit more about the model. I think there was a degree of discomfort and skepticism that Truecaller in its business model has room for taking information of users without explicit consent, and that leads to invasion of privacy. Do you want to set the record straight on that?
Yeah, I mean, everything we do is always opt-in. I think many of these so-called experts are probably not even using Truecaller. If we were doing things that we would not be able to stand behind, we would say that, or we would stop doing it. So that's how we look at it. We've always felt that we want to make our users trust our service even more in the way we actually process the data, because we do process data, of course we do. Many years ago, we actually decided to move all Indian data to India. So all Indian data that we process is stored in India and processed in India. So it actually doesn't even leave the country.
So there is no scope for data breach of any kind, even if the information is locally stored in data centers in India?
Well, there's been articles that has been popping up during the years, and it's always the same sort of article that just comes back to life. I think the first time it came up around a data breach was in 2018 or 17, something like that. And, we did what we felt was right, and that was actually investigating. Is this data coming from us and not? And we saw that most of that data, we've never even seen it before. So it didn't come from us. And so every year that story keeps coming up and we have to debunk it and say, we've looked at this. It's actually the same story from 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And, that's the end of it, basically.
To add to this is we have other methods of collecting this information, which is community-based. I don't know what one number is worth, but what is 100 million numbers worth for a telemarketer? So they obviously want to get access to that information. The easiest way we would never monetize on is by just selling that information. We would never do that. But there are companies out there that try to, for instance, scrape data or get access to information in illegitimate way. And to block these users and other people who try to use Truecaller in a way that it was not meant to be used, we obviously deploy different, whether it's AI algorithms or other things, to kind of block these kind of perpetrators, and to be able to distinguish between a real user and a non-real user, you need to collect some sort of basic information from the device. And I think that's also one of the misconceptions that, why do you need to collect my device ID? Well, it's to know that you're not a bot. I mean, if you were an expert really in the subject, and you understood how data security works, then you would be happy that we're actually collecting this to safeguard your information, because otherwise you're exposing yourself and the community and their data to a lot of things. So the information being collected is meant to protect their interest.
I think this entire phenomena of mistrust, as you call it, reached a boiling point in 2022. You had a US activist coming out with a report, a scathing report. They called it Truecallers, True Colors, and there were all sorts of accusations about tax fraud in India and data theft. How was it working in that environment of mistrust and building your reputation as a transparent and trustworthy company from scratch?
The reality is that over 400 million people trust our product every single day, and it keeps growing. So clearly, consumers all over the world, including in India, they actually trust us as a brand, as a company. And we've been doing this for 1.5 decades now. So I think we've done a tremendous job actually building a strong brand that people want to associate themselves with. On the other side, of course, you have financial short sellers. Their only job is to make money. And how do you make money? Well, by making up lies. That's how the world works. In India, you can actually, it's illegal to short a stock. You cannot do that. But in Sweden, you actually can. In a short seller report, you can write a bunch of things, and in the end, write, these are our opinions. It's not fact. And then you're cleared from a legal point of view. So as a publicly listed company, you're actually in a pretty weak position to defend yourself when certain allegations comes up. And it's been over 2 years since the short seller came with their report. And so far, not a single thing that came out of it has turned out to be true. But that's, the game of being in a public market. Everyone will try to make money, even those on the other side who are betting on the short side.
The Indian Army also red flagged Truecaller for data leaks.
So it was many years ago. The Indian Army decided that a long list of apps were not allowed by the army to use for various reasons. And on that list, Facebook was there, WhatsApp was there, Truecaller was there. I think it was like 500 apps which were on that list. So it wasn't anything specific towards us. It was just a policy that the Indian Army set up for the army, basically.
How did you go about rebuilding trust? Overall, a perception was created where there was suspicion about what Truecaller is doing. How have you addressed those?
Well, I think we've done what everyone would do, which is working with the community of your users, but also working with journalists like yourself and actually talk about reality. For many years, people in India actually thought that Truecaller was a Chinese company. And for geopolitical reasons, that created a lot of mistrust towards us. And for us,
how did that come about? I mean, there are no Chinese investors on board, as far as I know from the shareholders.
Well, we never had any Chinese shareholders, but I think it just came from the assumption that if you're a successful tech company, you're either American or you're Chinese.
Really?
Yes.
As frivolous as that?
Back in the days, before Indian government actually banned Chinese apps, there were a lot of successful apps in India. You had, of course, TikTok, but there were a lot of other popular apps here. So the assumption was basically it's either Chinese or it's either American. Who would guess Swedish? But we do have a lot of successful consumer app companies come from Sweden, like Spotify, for example. You have Minecraft, Candy Crush. But Sweden is a small country. It's smaller than Delhi, with 10 million in population. So no one really cares. But what we did, we had to say, hey, this app is made in India and in Sweden, just to set the record straight. And I think the team has done a fantastic job around that.
Now that India has somewhat clearly defined laws around data and privacy, how have you as a company worked around that legal framework?
It had the IT Act, but now with the new data protection bill, it has been improved and modernized. We've been, of course, following the development of this bill for many years, and last year, it was loved. And in the coming years, companies will have to adapt to that. I think we're well set for that. We're looking forward to it, and I think it was what the Indian government did well was that they learned from the mistakes that Europe made with
Such
the
as?
GDPR. Well, for example, in Europe, if you have a child in a preschool, you have to give consent as a parent to the preschool for them to even write your kid's name in a computer. I mean, you create a lot of frictions for a lot of industries which was not meant to happen. These type of frictions, India actually saw them, learned, and made sure that they wouldn't do the same mistakes.
Besides, I must tell you this, there are some factions which believe that you set up in India to bypass GDPR.
No, not really. The challenge that GDPR created for a European company was that you cannot store non-European data in Europe without causing a lot of challenges and issues. But if you're a non-European company, you can store your data in Europe without any problem. So it has actually made it harder for European businesses to operate outside of Europe, right? So in order for us to be compliant to GDPR, we had to make sure that we had different data environment, like servers, centers, one for Europe and one which is not for Europe.
I think, from our reading of the Indian the DPDP, it seems to have a much more nuanced version of that. So you can see that US has its own interpretation of how to deal with privacy. Europe has its own, China obviously has its own, and then you have India that has its own, rightfully so.
Do you think going ahead it's going to become more challenging to keep up with global data privacy norms, to build your business models, to keep up with disruption that we see on a regular basis?
I don't think so. One example is that everyone is talking about is AI regulations in Europe,
Yes.
right? We have built nothing in that industry, right? So we're actually making it harder for European companies to innovate in AI. Rajiv Chandrasekhar brought this up and said, we don't want to make the same mistakes as Europe did. We want India to flourish and actually be the country that innovates and builds new technology within AI. And I think that's the right way to go.
And it's necessary. I mean, with the development needs that India has, I mean, how would you exclude AI from contributing to, for instance, healthcare? So I think it's really important that we are practical about the things that we expect regulators to solve, and the market will resolve itself, because no one anyway wants bad healthcare advice.
You grew up as immigrants in Sweden. How did that shape your journey?
I think as an immigrant back in the days, you were also always an underdog because you look different than the rest. And in some way, it creates this mentality that you want to prove everyone that you're better. And you feel that you need to work much harder to sort of reach there. Creates a very, very strong resilience to actually go the extra mile, creating a lot of hunger and drive to sort of reach the top. At the same time, I think it has also made me very humble because it makes me appreciate the things and not take anything for granted.
For you, Nami?
Pretty much exactly the same. When me and Alan first became friends, this is one of the things where we really clicked on. That we had the same mentality of not necessarily being, all Swedish, not necessarily being all, Iranian in my case, and kind of seeing it as you have the best of both worlds and being content with that. Connecting on a deeper level was that our backgrounds was similar. In our households grew up with very strong mothers, and they were hardworking and pushing us forward all the time. Whether it's about getting education or whether it's about which friends you hang out with. And at the time, you don't appreciate it. We both had, strong women and strong mothers in our lives.
So from then to now, what does being on a rich list mean to you?
Nothing. We still have a very big passion for what we do, and this is where we spend our time, honestly. Of course, it makes life easier when you know that you don't need to care about the bills that you need to pay next month, and that has the biggest value. When I walk into grocery stores, I often look at the juice, because when we were small, my mom always used to buy the cheapest juice, and it's a bunch of chemicals. And you always wanted to buy this Tropicana, the beautiful orange juice, So every time I walk into grocery stores, I see these cheap ones that I used to drink, but I pick the Tropicana, the more expensive juice. And I think this is what I've been fighting for, These are the small pieces that really matters, at least to me.
How about you?
It's the same, of course, the comfort and in like knowing that you don't have to worry about the bills or not have to think about like the price of the bus ticket or like these very simple things. But then on the other end, I think it has had a lot of impact for our families as well. So I know both Alan and I have tried to make sure that our families stay close to us. And prior to starting Truecaller, when we were just dreaming of what if this thing becomes big, I asked Alan, what would you do if we reached? He said, I'll make sure my mom doesn't have to work again. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what I would have said. So I think that just matters a lot to us.
So are you like the favorites at home? You get star treatment at home? Like the best son award goes to you kind of a thing?
My mom always says, I knew you would be successful, my son. And I go, yeah, okay. No, but, it's, I sometimes reflect on it because when you're young, you're a teenager, you always, when you're with your friends, you always say, if I had $1 million, I would do this and that, and, But then you realize that in order to get there, you need to work extremely hard. And you will just be busy. You won't have time to do other things. So there's one thing to be a young and naive teenager with a lot of dreams, and then living in the reality as an adult and valuing the things that really matters. Health, that your family has a roof above their heads, that you have food on the table. These are the things that matters in the end.
You spoke about the India Connect and the strong cultural similarities as well. आप हिंदी समझते हैं?
No.
You answered it though.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I was planning to learn, but मेरा नाम अलन है. आप Truecaller use करती है. It's gonna come someday. I need to use some Duolingo for that.
It's very similar to Farsi though, isn't it?
When I grew up, we were watching Bollywood movies every now and then. And now I watch them more than ever. And I realize that a lot of the words that I hear in the Bollywood movies are the same words, slightly different pronunciation. But I can, listen to a sentence and make out a few words.
And which is the last movie that you watched, the Bollywood movie?
You don't want to know.
73% revenue comes from India. When do you plan to list in India?
Well, we're listed in Sweden, but we'll see if we ever get to list in India. The Indian stock market is extremely hot, of course, and we're quite busy managing Truecaller on the Swedish stock market. But we're always up for, looking into other possibilities.
What could the possible challenges be, to list in India as well?
Relisting becomes challenging because then you have to delist in Sweden and relist. There are certain regulations around that. For example, you have to be listed in your current market for more than 3 years. Then you can double list in India, as an example. We'll see in the future what happens. But of course, India is such an important market for us. Most of our users are here. So in hindsight, I think it would have made sense for us to list in India back in 2021. But there wasn't that many tech companies in India, that were listed. It wasn't until the beginning of 22 that's when you started to see more and more Indian tech companies going public. But in 2020, when we started to evaluate the different markets, we looked at India, we looked at the US, we looked at London, Sweden. India, I think, had almost 0 tech companies on the public stock market. So, the world has changed in a very short period of time.
Alan and Nami, it was wonderful having you on Pathbreakers. Many thanks.
Thank you very much for coming. It was fun.